The morning sun barely touched the glass walls of Denver International Airport when Daniel Carter walked through the main entrance. He carried a small duffel bag over his shoulder and a metal case in his right hand. The case was old and scratched from years of careful storage. Inside were his military medals from 32 years of service. Daniel was 70 years old now, with gray hair and lines on his face that told stories of hard years and harder decisions. He wore simple clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt, nothing that marked him as different from anyone else in the crowded terminal. He was traveling to Colorado Springs to visit his grandson's school. The boy had asked him to come speak at Career Day. Daniel had agreed, even though talking about his service always made him uncomfortable. The medals were for the kids to see, something real to help them understand what service meant. He joined the security line at Checkpoint C and waited with the patience that comes from decades of military discipline. The line moved slowly. People shuffled forward with their bags and shoes and laptops. Children complained about having to wait. Business travelers checked their phones with irritated expressions. Daniel simply stood and waited. He had learned long ago that some things could not be rushed. When his turn came, he placed his duffel bag on the conveyor belt and then carefully set down the metal case. The TSA agent barely looked at him as he waved him through the scanner. The machine beeped when Daniel walked through. He had a metal plate in his hip from an injury in Afghanistan. He always set off the detectors. The agent waved him aside for additional screening. Daniel waited again as another agent used a handheld scanner. Everything was routine until the metal case came through the X-ray machine. Kevin Phillips had been working at the checkpoint for 3 years. He was 28 years old and tired. The checkpoint was understaffed again, and the line stretched back through the terminal. He had already dealt with 3 angry passengers that morning, and his shift had only started an hour ago. When he saw the metal case on the screen, he pulled it aside without thinking much about it. Security protocols required inspection of anything that looked unusual. He opened the case without asking Daniel whose case it was. Inside were rows of medals pinned to blue fabric. A silver star sat at the top. Below it were 2 bronze stars. A purple heart rested in the corner. Campaign ribbons and service medals filled the rest of the case. They represented 3 decades of military service across multiple conflicts and deployments. Each medal had a story. Each ribbon marked time spent far from home in dangerous places. Kevin barely glanced at them. He was supposed to check for false bottoms or hidden compartments. He lifted the fabric and several medals came loose. They clattered onto the metal inspection table. Kevin set the case down carelessly and the remaining medals spilled out. Some fell to the floor. The purple heart landed near someone's shoe. The silver star slid under the conveyor belt. The bronze stars scattered across the dirty tiles. Daniel had finished his additional screening and came back to collect his belongings. He saw his medals on the floor and his jaw tightened. For a moment he said nothing. He just stared at the medals lying in the dirt and grime of the security checkpoint floor. People walked past them without noticing. A woman's rolling suitcase nearly ran over the purple heart. Daniel's voice was calm when he finally spoke. "Those are military decorations. I would appreciate it if you handled them with care." Kevin looked up from his inspection. His face showed irritation rather than concern. "Sir, everything needs additional screening. Please step aside. You are holding up the line." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. 32 years of service had taught him discipline. He had faced enemy fire and kept his composure. He had made life and death decisions without losing control. But standing in an airport watching his medals scattered on a dirty floor tested that control in a way combat never had. These medals represented friends who had died. They marked moments when he had done things he would never forget. They were not just medal and ribbon. They were memory and sacrifice and honor. He bent down slowly to pick up his medals. His hip ached from the old injury. His knees protested the movement. He got down on the floor in his clean jeans and started collecting the medals one by one. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the silver star. That medal was for a firefight where 3 men had saved his life. 2 of them had not made it home. He found the purple heart next to someone's shoe. That was from the day an IED had torn through his vehicle and killed his driver. Other passengers were watching now. Some had their phones out and were recording. A few people looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry on Daniel's behalf. But most just wanted to get through security and catch their flights. They had places to be, and the old man on the floor was just another delay. Kevin stood over Daniel with his arms crossed. "Sir, I need you to move faster. You are blocking the checkpoint." Daniel did not respond. He crawled forward on his knees to reach under the conveyor belt for the silver star. His fingers found it in the dust and old gum and forgotten trash. He pulled it out and held it for a moment. The star was still bright despite the dirt. He wiped it on his shirt. A young woman in line suddenly stepped forward. She had short, dark hair and wore civilian clothes, but something about her bearing marked her as military. She dropped to her knees next to Daniel without saying a word. She started helping him collect the medals. Her face was red with anger, but her hands were gentle as she picked up each decoration. She found one of the bronze stars near the wall and brought it back to Daniel. "Sir," she said quietly, "let me help you with these." Daniel looked at her and saw the recognition in her eyes. She knew what these medals meant. She understood in a way Kevin Phillips did not. "Thank you," he said. Together they gathered the remaining medals while Kevin Phillips stood watching with growing discomfort. The line had stopped moving entirely now. People were openly filming. An older woman near the back of the line spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Young man, those are medals of honor. You should show some respect." Kevin's face turned red. "Ma'am, I am just doing my job. Everyone needs to return to the line, but nobody moved." The young woman helping Daniel Carter collect his medals was named Lisa Henderson. She was a Marine corporal on leave, traveling home to visit family. She had served 2 tours overseas and knew exactly what each of those medals represented. As she handed Daniel the last bronze star, she looked up at Kevin Phillips with barely controlled anger. Her voice was quiet, but everyone nearby could hear it clearly. "These medals are not just metal. They represent service and sacrifice. They should be treated with respect." Kevin felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. His face grew redder. He had not meant any disrespect. He had just been doing his job, or at least that was what he told himself. But looking down at the elderly man on his knees gathering medals from a dirty floor, Kevin knew he had made a mistake. He just did not know how to fix it now. Pride and embarrassment mixed together and made him defensive. "I understand that," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But security procedures apply to everyone. I cannot make exceptions." A businessman in an expensive suit stepped out of line. He was tall with silver hair and wore a watch that probably cost more than Kevin made in a month. His voice carried authority. "Nobody is asking for exceptions. We are asking for basic human decency." That man served his country. "The least you can do is not throw his medals on the floor." Other voices joined in. A mother with 2 small children nodded in agreement. A college student with bright blue hair stopped recording on her phone long enough to say that this was wrong. A retired couple who had been standing quietly behind Daniel moved forward to offer their support. Even people who had been annoyed about the line stopping seemed to understand that something more important was happening. Daniel finally collected all his medals. He checked each one carefully for damage. The silver star had a small scratch that had not been there before. The Purple Heart's pin was bent. The case itself had a cracked hinge from where it had hit the floor. Daniel's hands were dirty from crawling on the checkpoint tiles. He stood up slowly, his hip protesting the movement. He brushed off his knees and looked at Kevin Phillips. His voice was steady when he spoke. "I have served this country for 32 years. I have been shot at and blown up. I have watched friends die. I have made decisions that still wake me up at night. All I ask is basic respect for what these medals represent. Not for me, but for everyone who earned them and everyone who did not come home." Kevin opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was 28 years old and had never served in the military. He had never been in a situation where his life depended on the person next to him. He had never had to make the kind of choices Daniel Carter had made. He did not understand these things, and his lack of understanding showed clearly on his face. Lisa Henderson stood next to Daniel. She was still angry, but she kept her voice respectful. "Sir, is there someone we can speak to about this? A supervisor?" Before Kevin could answer, a woman in a dark business suit approached from the priority security lane. She had been watching the entire incident unfold while waiting for her own bags to be screened. Her name was Margaret Bowen, and she was the Deputy Director of TSA Regional Operations. She had been doing a routine inspection tour of several airports in the region. She had not expected to witness something like this. Margaret walked directly to Kevin Phillips. She did not raise her voice, but her tone left no room for argument. Agent Phillips, I need you to step away from your station immediately. Agent Rodriguez will take over here. Kevin looked confused. Ma'am, I was just following procedures. We will discuss procedures in my office. Right now, I need you to step away. Margaret turned to Daniel and her expression softened slightly. Sir, I apologize for what has happened here. This is not how we train our agents to handle any passenger's belongings, especially items of such significance. Daniel nodded but said nothing. He was carefully placing his medals back into the damaged case. Each one went into its proper position. He worked slowly and methodically, making sure each pin was secure. Lisa helped him, her hands steady despite her anger. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse slowly. People moved back toward the line or continued through security, but many of them kept their phones out. They were uploading videos to social media. They were texting friends and family about what they had just witnessed. Within minutes, the incident was spreading across the internet. A video recorded by the college student with blue hair showed Daniel on his knees collecting medals from the floor, while Kevin Phillips stood over him with crossed arms. Another video from the businessman showed Margaret Bowen arriving and pulling Kevin aside. A third video, shot by someone further back in line, captured the moment when Lisa Henderson dropped to her knees to help Daniel. Each video was shared and reshared. Comments poured in from veterans and civilians alike. Some people defended Kevin, saying he was just doing his job in a difficult situation, but most people were angry. They saw an old man forced to crawl on a dirty floor to collect medals that represented a lifetime of service. They saw disrespect and callousness. They saw something that felt fundamentally wrong. Margaret Bowen led Kevin Phillips toward a security office near the checkpoint. She walked ahead of him without looking back. Kevin followed with his head down. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Other TSA agents at the checkpoint were already whispering to each other. They all knew Kevin, some felt sorry for him. Others thought he had it coming. Daniel finished packing his medals. The case would not close properly because of the broken hinge. He held it carefully in both hands. Lisa stood next to him, ready to help if needed. The businessman who had spoken up earlier approached them. Sir, I want you to know that not everyone has forgotten what your service means. My father was a veteran. Korea. He would have been furious if he had seen this. Daniel shook the man's hand. Thank you. What is your name? Gregory Shaw. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I appreciate your support. Gregory nodded and returned to the line to collect his own belongings. He made a mental note to do something about this situation, though he was not yet sure what. The retired couple approached next to offer their apologies on behalf of the TSA. Daniel thanked them as well. One by one, several passengers stopped to express their support or anger at what had happened. Through it all, Daniel remained calm and gracious. He thanked each person. He assured them he was fine. He did not complain or demand anything. His composure impressed everyone who spoke to him. This was a man who had faced far worse than a careless TSA agent. This was a man who understood that anger and demands would not fix anything. But even as Daniel maintained his composure, something was happening at the far end of the terminal that would change everything. A text message had just reached someone very important, someone who was about to make an unexpected detour. Secretary of Defense Patrick Donnelly was not supposed to be at Denver International Airport that morning. His schedule had him flying out of a military airfield outside the city. But a last-minute change in meetings meant he needed to catch a commercial flight to Washington instead. He preferred traveling this way when possible, mixing with regular civilians, seeing how normal Americans lived and traveled. It kept him grounded in a job that could easily disconnect him from everyday reality. He moved through the terminal with minimal security, just his military aide, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Morris, and 2 discreet Secret Service agents. Patrick was in his early 60s with gray hair and the upright posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather briefcase. Most people who passed him in the terminal had no idea who he was. Frank Morris walked beside him checking his phone. A message had just come in from a friend who worked airport security. The message included a link to a video that was already going viral on social media. Frank watched it once, then watched it again. His jaw tightened. He showed the phone to Secretary Donnelly without saying anything. Patrick stopped walking and watched the video. It showed an elderly man on his knees on a dirty airport floor collecting military medals. A TSA agent stood over him with crossed arms. Other passengers were filming. A young woman in civilian clothes was helping the old man gather his medals. The video was only 40 seconds long, but it told a complete story of disrespect and indifference. "Where was this recorded?" Patrick asked quietly. "Here, sir. Checkpoint C, about 15 minutes ago." Patrick looked at the video again. He could see the medals clearly in one frame. A silver star, bronze stars, a Purple Heart. These were not minor decorations. These represented serious combat service. The old man handling them so carefully despite being on his knees spoke to his character and discipline. "Change of plans," Patrick said. "We are going to Checkpoint C." Frank nodded and spoke quickly into his radio to inform the Secret Service agents. They adjusted their route through the terminal. Patrick walked with purpose but not urgency. He did not run. He did not push past people. But everyone who saw him instinctively moved aside. Some quality of command made people defer to him without understanding why. They reached Checkpoint C 10 minutes after the incident had occurred. A small crowd was still gathered around the security station. Margaret Bowen was visible talking to Daniel Carter while Lisa Henderson stood nearby. Kevin Phillips had already been escorted away. The checkpoint had returned to normal operations, but tension still hung in the air. Patrick approached the group and the crowd parted for him. Margaret Bowen recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. Daniel was checking his medals one more time when a shadow fell across him. He looked up to see a tall man in a dark suit standing at attention. The man raised his hand in a crisp military salute. Daniel's training took over before his mind fully processed what was happening. He stood and returned the salute. His back straightened, his shoulders squared. For a moment, he was not a 70-year-old retired colonel, but an active duty soldier responding to a superior officer. Then he focused on the man's face and recognition dawned slowly. "Colonel Daniel Carter," Patrick said, extending his hand after completing the salute. "Secretary of Defense Patrick Donnelly. I apologize for what happened to you here today." Daniel shook his hand, still processing the situation. "Mr. Secretary, I was not expecting this. I was not expecting to be here either, but sometimes fate intervenes." Patrick glanced down at the damaged metal case Daniel was holding. "May I see your decorations?" Daniel handed him the case. Patrick opened it carefully and examined each medal. He took his time reading the citations and ribbons. His expression grew more serious with each decoration he studied. Finally, he looked up at Daniel. "Silver Star for heroic action at Firebase Phoenix. That was 1991, correct? The firebase was about to be overrun and you led a counterattack that saved over 100 soldiers." Daniel looked surprised. "You know about that, sir?" "I know about you, Colonel Carter. Your service record is taught at the War College as an example of leadership under fire. The Bronze Stars from your tours in Afghanistan. The Purple Heart from the embassy extraction in 2008, where you were injured saving diplomatic staff." Patrick's voice carried through the checkpoint. Other people had stopped to watch and listen. Frank Morris stood nearby with his phone out. He was not filming, but he was taking notes. This was the kind of moment that needed to be documented. Margaret Bowen stood to the side, her face a mixture of relief and concern. She was glad the secretary was handling this, but worried about the implications for her agency. Patrick continued speaking. "You served for 32 years. Multiple combat deployments. Commanded at every level from platoon to brigade. Mentored hundreds of young officers. Received 3 letters of commendation from previous secretaries of defense." He paused. "And today your medals were scattered on a floor like trash." Daniel's voice was steady. "Mistakes happen, sir." I am sure the young man did not mean any disrespect. Perhaps not. But intent does not erase impact. Your medals represent more than your service, Colonel. They represent every person who has worn the uniform, every family that has sacrificed, every community that has sent its sons and daughters to war. Patrick closed the medal case carefully and handed it back to Daniel. When those medals hit the floor, it dishonors all of us. The crowd around them had grown larger. People held up their phones recording every word. This was no longer just a local incident. This was the Secretary of Defense publicly addressing how America treats its veterans. The implications were enormous. Lisa Henderson stood at attention nearby. She had not moved since the secretary arrived. Frank Morris noticed her and recognized the bearing of an active-duty Marine. He made a note to get her information. The secretary would want to follow up with her. Patrick turned to Margaret Bowen. "Deputy Director Bowen, I trust you will conduct a thorough review of this incident and the procedures that led to it. Absolutely, Mr. Secretary. I've already begun the process. Good. I also want a full report on training protocols regarding the handling of military items and the treatment of veterans. This should not happen. Not here, not anywhere. Yes, sir. Patrick looked back at Daniel. Colonel, where were you headed today before this incident interrupted your travels? Colorado Springs, sir. My grandson's school. He asked me to speak at Career Day. Then you have an important mission ahead. Children need to hear from people like you. They need to understand what service means. Patrick glanced at his aide. Frank, please make sure Colonel Carter's belongings are handled properly, and that he makes his flight with time to spare. First-class upgrade if available. Yes, sir. Patrick extended his hand to Daniel again. Thank you for your service, Colonel. And thank you for your continued patience and grace in handling this situation. You represent the best of what our military produces. Daniel shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. This was unexpected but appreciated. Sometimes the unexpected is exactly what we need. Patrick nodded to the crowd that had gathered. Many people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others stood in respectful silence. The secretary turned and walked back toward his own gate with Frank Morris beside him. The checkpoint remained quiet for a long moment after he left. Then slowly conversation resumed. People moved back toward their gates. But everything had changed. A simple incident of disrespect had become something much larger. A retired colonel had been honored by the highest civilian authority in the military establishment. And thousands of people had witnessed it happening in real time. Daniel Carter sat in the first-class cabin of his flight to Colorado Springs and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. The airline staff had upgraded his ticket without question after Frank Morris had made a phone call. They had treated him with careful respect, almost reverence. The flight attendant had personally stored his damaged metal case in a safe compartment. Other passengers in first class had recognized him from the videos that were now spreading across every social media platform. He looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about Patrick Donnelly's words. The secretary had known details about his service that Daniel had almost forgotten himself. Firebase Phoenix had been over 30 years ago. He could still remember the smell of gunpowder and the screams of wounded men. He could still see the faces of the 3 soldiers who had saved his life that night. 2 of them had died in the fighting. Their names were on the Vietnam Memorial Wall, even though the firebase had actually been just across the border in a place the war was not supposed to be happening. The Bronze Stars had come from Afghanistan during the years when he was older and should have been behind a desk, but kept volunteering for deployment because younger officers needed experienced leadership. He had been 50 years old on his last combat tour, too old to be jumping out of helicopters and leading patrols. But he had done it anyway because that was what the mission required. The Purple Heart was from the embassy extraction. That metal hurt to think about. His driver had been 23 years old with a wife and baby daughter at home. The IED had killed him instantly. Daniel had been knocked unconscious and woken up in a hospital with a shattered hip, and the knowledge that a young man had died while he survived. That medal was not an honor. It was a burden he would carry forever. His phone vibrated constantly with messages and notifications. His daughter had called 3 times. Friends he had not heard from in years were reaching out. News organizations wanted interviews. His phone's battery was draining fast from all the activity. Daniel turned it off and closed his eyes. He was tired and his hip ached from kneeling on the checkpoint floor. The flight was short. Less than an hour in the air. When they landed in Colorado Springs, Daniel gathered his belongings carefully. The flight attendant brought his metal case personally and handed it to him with both hands. "Thank you for your service, sir," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and made his way off the plane. His daughter Kate was waiting for him at baggage claim. She was 45 years old with her mother's dark hair and Daniel's blue eyes. She hugged him tightly without saying anything for a long moment. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. "Dad, I saw the videos. Are you okay?" "I am fine, Katie, just tired." "That man had no right to treat you that way. He made a mistake." "People make mistakes," Kate shook her head. "You are too forgiving." "Maybe, but anger does not fix anything." They walked to her car together. Daniel's grandson Peter was waiting in the back seat. He was 12 years old and tall for his age. He jumped out of the car when he saw his grandfather and ran to hug him. Daniel held the boy close and felt some of the tension from the morning finally ease. "Grandpa, everyone at school saw the video. They are all talking about it. The principal called and asked if you still want to come speak tomorrow." "Of course I do. That is why I came." They drove to Kate's house in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets. Daniel had visited many times before. The house was familiar and comfortable. Kate made him lunch while Peter sat at the kitchen table asking questions about the morning's events. Daniel answered patiently, trying to downplay the drama. But Peter had seen the videos. He had seen the Secretary of Defense salute his grandfather. He had heard Patrick Donnelly list his grandfather's accomplishments. The boy looked at Daniel with new understanding and something close to awe. That afternoon, more videos from the airport appeared online. Someone had recorded the entire conversation between Daniel and Secretary Donnelly. The audio was clear. Patrick's words about Daniel's service and what the medals represented had been captured perfectly. News networks were playing the footage on repeat. Political commentators were discussing it. Veterans organizations were issuing statements, praising the Secretary's response and calling for better treatment of veterans in airports. Kevin Phillips had become a national villain in the span of a few hours. His name and face were everywhere. People were calling for him to be fired. They were leaving angry messages on the TSA's social media accounts. Some of the comments were reasonable criticisms. Others were vicious personal attacks. Kevin had deleted all his social media accounts by mid-afternoon. Margaret Bowen was conducting damage control. She gave a statement to the press praising Secretary Donnelly's response and promising a full review of TSA procedures. She announced that all TSA agents in her region would undergo additional training on handling military items and treating veterans with proper respect. She carefully avoided blaming Kevin Phillips directly, while making it clear that his actions did not represent TSA standards. By evening, the story had reached international news. Foreign media outlets were covering it as an example of American military culture and respect for veterans. Some praised the Secretary's quick response. Others criticized the fact that the incident had happened at all. Everyone had an opinion. Daniel tried to ignore all of it. He spent the evening with Kate and Peter, looking through old photo albums and telling stories about his time in service. Peter wanted to hear about everything, the firefights and the medals and the close calls. Daniel told him some of it, editing out the parts that would give the boy nightmares. He talked about the friends he had served with, the good leaders and the bad ones, the mistakes and the victories, the long, boring stretches between moments of terror. Kate listened quietly. She had heard some of these stories before, but never in such detail. Her father had always been private about his military service. He had never been the type to wear veteran hats or put military bumper stickers on his car. His service was personal, something he carried quietly. Peter fell asleep on the couch while Daniel was talking about Afghanistan. Kate covered him with a blanket and sat back down. She looked at her father for a long moment before speaking. "The videos changed how people see you. I did not want that. I know, but maybe it is good. Maybe people need to be reminded what service means. What you and people like you have sacrificed." Daniel was quiet. He was thinking about the young Marine who had helped him at the checkpoint. Lisa Henderson had understood immediately what those medals represented. She had acted without hesitation. That gave him hope. There were still people who understood. Still people who cared. His phone was charging in the kitchen. When he turned it on to set an alarm for the morning, he found hundreds of new messages. Most were supportive. Some were from old military friends who had seen the news. A few were from journalists requesting interviews. One message stood out. It was from Secretary Donnelly's office. The secretary wanted Daniel to know that Lisa Henderson would be receiving a commendation for her actions at the checkpoint. The message also included a personal note from Patrick Donnelly, thanking Daniel again for his grace and service. Daniel replied with a simple thank you and turned the phone off again. Tomorrow he would go speak to Peter's school. He would show them his medals and try to help them understand what service meant. The damaged case with its cracked hinge would be part of that lesson now. Sometimes things got broken. Sometimes people made mistakes. What mattered was how you responded, what you did next, whether you chose anger or understanding. He went to bed thinking about the young TSA agent. Kevin Phillips had made a mistake that would follow him for a long time. Daniel hoped the young man would learn from it, hoped he would become better rather than bitter. That was all anyone could do after making a mistake. Learn and try to do better next time. Kevin Phillips sat in his apartment staring at his laptop screen. He had not slept since the incident at the checkpoint. His hands shook as he scrolled through the endless stream of comments and articles about what had happened. His face was everywhere. News sites had found his social media photos before he could delete them. People were posting his personal information online. Someone had found out where he lived and posted his address. He had received 3 death threats in the last hour alone. His phone rang. It was his supervisor, Margaret Bowen. Kevin answered with a voice rough from crying. "Kevin, do not come to work tomorrow. You are suspended pending a full investigation." "I understand. This situation has become bigger than either of us anticipated. The Secretary of Defense got involved. The media is covering it internationally. The TSA administrator in Washington is demanding answers. I did not mean any disrespect. I was just doing my job." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "I know you did not intend this. But intent and impact are different things. You need to understand that. What happened yesterday will have consequences." After the call ended, Kevin sat in silence for a long time. He kept replaying the incident in his mind. The old man on his knees collecting metals from the dirty floor. The young Marine helping him. The crowd watching and judging. The Secretary of Defense appearing like some kind of avenging angel to set things right. Kevin had never felt so small and ashamed in his life. He wanted to apologize but had no way to reach Daniel Carter. His lawyer, appointed by the TSA union, had advised him to say nothing publicly. Any statement could be used against him in the investigation. So Kevin sat in his apartment watching his life fall apart on the internet and had no way to make it right. Meanwhile, the incident was creating ripples far beyond Kevin's personal crisis. Margaret Bowen was implementing immediate changes to TSA procedures. She drafted new protocols for handling military items. She organized mandatory training sessions for all agents in her region. The training would cover not just procedures but cultural sensitivity and understanding what military service meant. The TSA administrator in Washington was paying attention. He announced that Margaret's new training program would be adopted nationwide. Every TSA agent in America would learn proper procedures for handling military decorations and treating veterans with respect. The program would be called the Veterans Recognition Initiative. It would launch within 3 months. Lisa Henderson received a formal letter of commendation from Secretary Donnelly's office. The letter praised her immediate action to assist a fellow service member and her demonstration of Marine Corps values. The commendation would go in her permanent record and would help her career advancement. But Lisa did not care about that. She had done what any decent person would do. Seeing an old man forced to collect his medals from a dirty floor had made her angry. Helping him had been instinctive. Gregory Shaw, the businessman who had spoken up at the checkpoint, could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. He had made his fortune in technology and had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. He had always meant to do something meaningful with his wealth, but had never found the right cause. Watching Daniel Carter on his knees had crystallized something for him. Gregory called his lawyer and his accountant. He wanted to establish a foundation to help veterans transition to civilian careers. Too many good people left the military and struggled to find their place in the civilian world. They had skills and discipline and experience, but did not know how to translate that into civilian job markets. Gregory's company could help. He would commit $5 million to start. The foundation would provide job training, resume assistance, interview coaching, and direct placement services. He worked through the night drafting plans. By morning, he had a complete framework. The Gregory Shaw Veterans Foundation would launch within 6 months. He would partner with major corporations to create guaranteed interview opportunities for veterans. He would hire former military officers to run the program. They would understand the challenges because they had lived them. Gregory tried to find contact information for Daniel Carter. He wanted to involve him somehow, maybe as an advisor or board member. But Daniel had no social media presence and his phone number was unlisted. Gregory made a note to keep trying. The old colonel was exactly the kind of person this foundation needed. News organizations continued covering the story for days. They found other veterans who had experienced similar treatment at airports. They interviewed TSA agents who defended the agency while acknowledging that mistakes happened. They spoke with military families about the disconnect between civilian and military culture. The incident had opened a conversation about how America treated its veterans that went far beyond one airport checkpoint. Political figures weighed in. Senators gave speeches about honoring military service. Representatives introduced bills to improve veterans' treatment in federal facilities. Most of it was performative, politicians seizing an opportunity to look patriotic. But some of the proposals had merit. A few might even become law. Daniel tried to stay out of the media circus. He declined interview requests from major networks. He did not want to be the face of veteran mistreatment. He just wanted to visit his grandson's school and then go home. But the story had taken on a life of its own. Peter's school was overwhelmed with media attention. News vans parked outside. Reporters tried to interview students and teachers. The principal issued a statement saying that Daniel Carter would speak to students as planned, but no media would be allowed on campus. This was about education, not spectacle. The night before career day, Daniel sat with Peter going through his medals one more time. He explained the story behind each one. Not the sanitized versions he had told before, but something closer to the truth. Peter listened with wide eyes, understanding for the first time what his grandfather had experienced. "Grandpa, why did that man throw your medals on the floor?" Daniel considered the question carefully. I do not think he understood what they meant. He saw metal objects that needed to be checked for security. He did not see the stories behind them, the people they represent, the sacrifices they mark. But that is mean. Yes, it was. But I do not think he meant to be mean. Sometimes people do hurtful things without understanding the impact. That does not excuse it, but it helps explain it. Are you still mad at him? I was, but staying angry does not help anything. I hope he learns from this. I hope he becomes more thoughtful and understanding. Peter touched the Purple Heart gently. This one is from when you got hurt. Yes. Does it still hurt? My hip hurts sometimes. But that is not what that medal is about. It is about my driver who died that day. His name was Carlos. He had a wife and a baby daughter. That medal reminds me of him, of the cost of service. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Peter asked the question that had been building all evening. Grandpa, when I grow up, should I join the military? Daniel looked at his grandson's young face and felt the weight of the question. Kate had asked him not to encourage Peter toward military service. She wanted her son safe. Daniel understood that. But he also understood the call to serve. That is a decision only you can make. The military taught me discipline and leadership. It gave me purpose. It showed me what I was capable of. But it also took things from me. Friends I will never see again. Parts of myself I cannot get back. Years away from your grandmother and your mother, he paused. If you decide to serve, do it for the right reasons. Not because of videos or medals or what people say. Do it because you want to be part of something bigger than yourself. Because you want to serve your country and the people around you. Peter nodded slowly. He was only 12, but Daniel could see him processing these heavy ideas. The boy would make his own choice in time. For now, he was just trying to understand his grandfather better, trying to make sense of what had happened at the airport and what it all meant. Outside, the news vans were gone, but the story continued spreading across social media and news sites. Kevin Phillips remained in his apartment alone with his shame. Margaret Bowen worked late into the night finalizing training protocols. Lisa Henderson prepared to return to her unit. Gregory Shaw refined his foundation plans. And thousands of veterans across the country watched the news and felt seen in a way they had not felt in years. The school gymnasium was packed when Daniel arrived the next morning. What was supposed to be a small career day presentation for Peter's 8th grade class had turned into something much larger. The principal had opened it to the entire school. Parents had asked to attend. Teachers from other grades brought their students. Local veterans had shown up in uniform to show support. The room held over 300 people. Daniel stood backstage looking through a gap in the curtain at the crowd. His damaged metal case sat on a table beside him. Kate stood nearby, worried about her father being overwhelmed. Peter paced excitedly, proud that his grandfather was the center of attention but nervous about what he might say. The principal, a woman named Helen Grant, approached Daniel with an apologetic expression. Colonel Carter, I am sorry this has become such a big event. We tried to keep it small, but word spread quickly. It is fine, Daniel said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. Public speaking had never bothered him in the military. He had briefed generals and addressed entire battalions. But this felt different. More personal. More pressure to get it right. Helen made some brief introductory remarks to the crowd. She thanked everyone for coming and reminded students that this was a learning opportunity, not a spectacle. Then she called Daniel to the stage. He walked out carrying his medal case. The crowd applauded, some people standing. Daniel felt uncomfortable with the attention but kept his expression neutral. He set the case on a podium and waited for the noise to die down. When the room was finally quiet, he began. I did not come here to talk about what happened at the airport. That got everyone's attention. The crowd had expected him to address the incident that had made him nationally famous. But Daniel had other plans. I came to talk about service, about what it means to be part of something larger than yourself, about the choices we make and why we make them. He opened the medal case and held it up so people in the back could see. These medals are not about me. Every single one represents other people. People I served with. People who saved my life. People who did not come home. He took out the silver star and held it up. This medal is from a night in 1991. Our fire base was about to be overrun. We were outnumbered and low on ammunition. 3 soldiers saved my life that night. Their names were Marcus, Jimmy, and Luis. Marcus and Luis died in that fight. Jimmy survived but lost his leg. When I look at this medal, I see their faces. I remember their courage. This is their medal, not mine. The room was completely silent. Even the younger children sat still, sensing the weight of what they were hearing. Daniel picked up one of the bronze stars. This medal is from Afghanistan. I was 50 years old on that deployment, too old to be jumping out of helicopters and leading patrols. But we were short on experienced officers and the mission required it. This medal represents the young soldiers I served with, 19 and 20-year-old kids who showed more bravery than I had at their age. They trusted me to lead them. Some of them died trusting me. That responsibility never goes away. He set down the bronze star and picked up the Purple Heart. His hands shook slightly. This is the hardest one to talk about. This medal is from the day an IED exploded under our vehicle. My driver was killed instantly. His name was Carlos. He was 23 years old. He had a wife named Maria and a baby daughter named Sophia. He died and I survived. There is no logic to that. No fairness. This medal does not honor my sacrifice. It marks his. Daniel set the Purple Heart down carefully. He looked out at the crowd and saw tears on many faces. Adults and children alike were crying quietly. Peter sat in the front row with tears streaming down his cheeks. Kate had her hand over her mouth. The military taught me many things. Discipline, leadership, teamwork, how to make decisions under pressure, how to function with little sleep and less food, how to trust people with my life and deserve their trust in return. These are valuable lessons. They have served me well in civilian life. He paused and chose his next words carefully. But the military also took things from me. Years with my wife before she passed away. Time with my daughter as she grew up. Friends who died young. Parts of myself that I will never get back. Anyone who tells you that military service is easy or glamorous is lying. It is hard. It is dangerous. It requires sacrifices that you cannot fully understand until you make them. A hand went up in the third row. A young girl with glasses asked permission to speak. Sir, why did you join the military if it is so hard? Daniel smiled slightly. That is the right question. I joined because I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I wanted to test myself. I wanted to know what I was capable of. And I stayed because of the people. The men and women I served with became my family. We depended on each other in ways that are hard to explain to people who have never experienced it. Another hand went up. A boy in the back asked, Do you think that TSA guy understood what your medals meant? Daniel had known this question would come. No, I do not think he did. Not in that moment. He saw objects that needed to be checked for security. He did not see the stories and the sacrifices they represented. But that was not entirely his fault. Most people do not understand. They have never served. Never been in situations where your life depends on the person next to you. We cannot expect everyone to understand. But we can hope they treat things they do not understand with respect. An older student raised his hand. Are you still angry about what happened? I was angry. Very angry. But anger does not fix anything. That young man made a mistake. A big one. But people make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. Whether we learn and grow or whether we stay stuck in our anger. Daniel talked for another 30 minutes. He answered questions about basic training, about combat, about coming home, about transitioning to civilian life. He talked about the friends he had made and lost. the places he had been, the things he had seen. He was honest about the difficulties and the costs, but he was also honest about the pride he felt in his service and the meaning it had given his life. When he finished, the crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. People were openly crying. Veterans in the audience saluted. Students came forward to shake his hand and look at his medals up close. Daniel let them touch the medals, explaining the story behind each one. He let them see the bent pin on the Purple Heart and the scratch on the Silver Star. He showed them the cracked hinge on the case. "These damages are part of the story now," he told a group of curious students. "They remind me that even important things can be treated carelessly. But they also remind me that damage does not erase meaning. These medals still represent the same sacrifices and the same people, even with scratches and broken hinges." Peter stayed close to his grandfather throughout the event. He helped explain things to younger students. He felt proud and sad and confused all at once. His grandfather was a hero to all these people. But listening to the stories behind the medals, Peter also understood the cost of that heroism, the friends who had died, the injuries that still caused pain, the time lost with family. After the event, several local veterans approached Daniel. They thanked him for his service. They shared their own stories. They talked about the challenges of coming home and finding purpose in civilian life. One older veteran, a Vietnam-era soldier named Larry who walked with a cane, shook Daniel's hand for a long time. "Thank you for talking about the hard parts. People need to hear that. They need to understand that service is not just parades and medals. It is sacrifice and loss and living with decisions you made decades ago." Daniel nodded. Someone needed to say it. "Well, you said it well." The gymnasium slowly emptied. The principal thanked Daniel again. Teachers told him it was the best career day presentation they had ever witnessed. Parents expressed gratitude for his honesty. Through it all, Daniel remained humble and gracious. He deflected praise and focused attention on the other veterans in the room. Kate drove him back to her house. They rode in comfortable silence for most of the trip. Finally, she spoke. "Dad, that was incredible." "I have never heard you talk about your service like that." "I usually do not." "Why today?" Daniel thought about the question. Because what happened at the airport opened a conversation. People were paying attention. Maybe for the first time in years they were actually listening when veterans talked. "I wanted to use that attention for something meaningful." "You did." Peter sat in the back seat wearing his grandfather's dog tags. Daniel had given them to him that morning as a gift. The boy had not taken them off since. He touched them constantly, feeling the worn metal under his fingers. 6 months passed before Daniel heard from Kevin Phillips again. In that time, the world had moved on from the airport incident. News stories captured public attention. The videos were still online but no longer trending. Daniel had returned to his quiet life in his small house. He declined most interview requests and speaking invitations. He had said what he needed to say at Peter's school. He had no interest in becoming a professional veteran spokesperson. The metal case sat on his dresser with its cracked hinge. He had refused offers to have it professionally repaired. The damage was part of its story now. Every time he looked at it, he thought not just about the medals themselves, but about everything that had followed. The conversation it had sparked. The changes it had prompted. The people it had touched. Margaret Bowen's Veterans Recognition Initiative had been implemented nationwide. Thousands of TSA agents had completed the training program. Reports suggested improved interactions between agents and veterans at airports across the country. It was a small change, but meaningful. Daniel received occasional letters from veterans thanking him for bringing attention to the issue. He answered each one personally. Lisa Henderson had been promoted to sergeant. The commendation from Secretary Donnelly had helped, but her own merit had sealed it. She continued serving with the same dedication that had prompted her to help Daniel that day at the checkpoint. She kept a copy of the commendation letter in her dress uniform pocket. It reminded her why she served. Gregory Shaw had officially launched his foundation. The Gregory Shaw Veterans Foundation had already placed 200 veterans in good civilian jobs. The success rate was impressive. Veterans who completed the program had an 80% employment rate within 3 months. Gregory had expanded his initial $5 million commitment to $10 million. He had also recruited several major corporations to partner with the foundation. Things were going better than he had hoped. Kevin Phillips had quit the TSA 3 weeks after the incident. The suspension had become untenable. Even though the formal investigation had not recommended firing him, Kevin knew he could not continue working there. Every passenger looked at him with recognition or suspicion. Coworkers avoided him. The job had become impossible. He had spent 6 months working construction and thinking about what had happened. The anger and shame had faded slowly into something closer to understanding. He had taken a volunteer position at a local veterans center, helping with administrative work and listening to stories. The veterans there knew who he was. Most treated him with polite distance. A few were openly hostile, but some gave him a chance to prove he had learned from his mistake. He learned about PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. He learned about the challenges veterans faced transitioning to civilian life. He learned about the bonds formed in combat and the difficulties of explaining those bonds to people who had never experienced them. Most importantly, he learned to listen, to really hear what people were saying instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. Kevin wanted to apologize to Daniel Carter. He had wanted to do it since the day of the incident, but his lawyer had advised against contact. Then time had passed and the moment seemed to have gone. How do you apologize for something that had become a national news story? How do you say sorry for hurting someone in a way that was witnessed by millions? But 6 months of working at the Veterans Center had taught Kevin that hard conversations were necessary, that apologies mattered even when they were difficult. That growth required uncomfortable honesty, so he found Daniel's address through public records and wrote a letter. Then he threw the letter away and wrote another one. Then he threw that one away too. Finally, he decided that a letter was not enough. This required a face-to-face conversation. He drove to Daniel's town, a 3-hour trip from Denver. He found Daniel's house, a modest place with a well-maintained lawn and American flag on the porch. Kevin sat in his car for 20 minutes trying to find courage. Finally, he walked to the door and knocked. Daniel answered wearing old jeans and a work shirt. He had been doing yard work. He looked at Kevin for a long moment without expression. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." They sat in Daniel's living room. Photos of his late wife and daughter decorated the walls. Military memorabilia filled one bookshelf, but it was not displayed prominently. Just part of a life that included many things. Kevin looked around the room and saw a normal home. He had somehow expected something different, something that marked this man as special or heroic, but it was just a house where a man lived quietly. "I am sure you know who I am," Kevin said finally. "I do. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to do it 6 months ago, but my lawyer said not to. Then time passed and it seemed too late. But I realized it is never too late to apologize for hurting someone." Daniel listened without interrupting. Kevin talked for 10 minutes, explaining what he had learned and how he had changed. He talked about the Veterans Center and the stories he had heard. He talked about his own ignorance and how the incident had forced him to confront it. He did not make excuses. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply apologized with complete honesty. When Kevin finished, Daniel was quiet for a long time. He looked at the young man who had caused him such humiliation and anger. He saw someone different now, someone who had taken a terrible mistake and used it to become better. That took courage. "I appreciate you coming here," Daniel said finally. "Apologizing in person takes guts. Writing a letter would have been easier. A letter would not have been enough. No, probably not." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You hurt me that day. Not physically, but in a way that was harder to deal with. Those medals represent the most important things in my life, the people I served with, the sacrifices we made. Watching them scatter across a dirty floor felt like watching those sacrifices dismissed as meaningless." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I understand that now. I did not understand it then. I know you did not. That is what made it so frustrating. You had no idea what you were doing." Daniel paused. "But you know now. And you have done something about it. That counts for something." They talked for another hour. Daniel told Kevin about his service in more detail than he had shared with most people. He explained why each medal mattered, what it represented, who it honored. Kevin listened with the careful attention he had learned at the Veterans Center. He asked questions that showed genuine interest and understanding. Daniel talked about coming home from war and struggling to fit into civilian life, about feeling disconnected from people who had never experienced combat, about carrying guilt for surviving when others had not. Kevin began to understand that the medals were not symbols of glory. They were markers of pain and loss and sacrifice that Daniel carried every day. I work at a veterans center now, Kevin said. Volunteer position. I help with paperwork and event planning. Mostly I just listen to stories. The veterans there know who I am. Most are polite but distant. Some are openly hostile. But a few have given me a chance. What have you learned? That I knew nothing. That service is complicated and difficult and important. That veterans deserve respect not just for what they did but for what they carry after. Kevin looked down at his hands. I also learned that I am not cut out for security work. I thought I was serving people by keeping them safe. But I did not see the people. I only saw potential threats and security procedures. Daniel nodded. That is an honest assessment. What will you do instead? I do not know yet, but I want to keep working with veterans somehow. Maybe not at the center forever, but something that helps, something that makes up for what I did, even though I know I can never fully make up for it. You are right that you cannot erase what happened, but you can use it to do better going forward. That is all anyone can do after making a mistake. Daniel stood and walked to his bookshelf. He pulled down the metal case with its cracked hinge. See this damage? I refuse to have it fixed. It is part of the story now. A reminder that even important things can be treated carelessly, but also a reminder that damage does not erase meaning. Kevin looked at the case and the metals inside. I am sorry I caused that damage. I know you are. And I accept your apology. Daniel extended his hand. People make mistakes. What matters is what you do next. You are doing the right things. Keep doing them. They shook hands. Kevin felt a weight lift that he had been carrying for 6 months. The guilt and shame did not disappear completely. They probably never would. But Daniel's acceptance made them bearable. Made them something he could carry and learn from rather than something that crushed him. Before Kevin left, Daniel gave him something unexpected. It was a coin, the kind military units give out for recognition and morale. This one was from Daniel's last unit in Afghanistan. It had the unit crest on one side and honor service sacrifice on the other. I want you to have this, Daniel said, not as forgiveness. You already have that, but as a reminder of what service means and why it matters. Keep it with you. When you doubt yourself or forget why you are doing this work, look at it and remember. Kevin held the coin carefully. Thank you, sir. I will. And stop calling me sir. My name is Daniel. Kevin nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He left the house and sat in his car for several minutes. 2 years after the airport incident, Daniel received an invitation that surprised him. The TSA was hosting a national conference on customer service and cultural sensitivity. They wanted him to be a keynote speaker. The invitation came with a personal note from the TSA administrator, explaining that Daniel's story had been the catalyst for widespread changes in how the agency operated. They wanted him to speak about respect, service, and second chances. Daniel almost declined. He was 72 now and preferred quiet days at home. Public speaking still made him uncomfortable despite the positive response to his talk at Peter's school. But Kate encouraged him to accept. Peter, now 14 and seriously considering a military career after high school, told him that people needed to hear his message. Daniel finally agreed. The conference was in Washington. Daniel flew out a day early and stayed in a hotel near the convention center. The night before his speech, there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, Kevin Phillips stood in the hallway looking nervous but more confident than their last meeting. Kevin, Daniel said, genuinely surprised. What are you doing here? The conference organizers told me you would be speaking. I wanted to see you before your speech. If that is okay. Daniel stepped aside and let him in. They sat in the small hotel room and Kevin explained what had happened in the 2 years since their last conversation. He had continued working at the Veterans Center and had eventually been hired full-time as a program coordinator. He had helped expand their services to include job training and mental health support. He had recruited volunteers and organized fundraising events. He had become a genuine advocate for veterans. I never forgot what you told me, Kevin said, about using mistakes to do better. That coin you gave me, I carry it every day. When things get hard or I feel like I am not doing enough, I look at it and remember why this matters. Daniel was impressed. The young man who had carelessly scattered his medals had become someone dedicated to serving veterans. That transformation meant something. It meant that people could change. That mistakes could lead to growth instead of just shame and defeat. I am proud of you, Daniel said simply. Kevin's eyes filled with tears. Those 4 words meant more than any formal recognition or award. They meant that the man he had wronged saw his efforts and acknowledged his growth. They meant that redemption was possible. They talked until late into the night. Kevin told stories about veterans he had helped. Daniel shared updates about Peter and his continued interest in military service. They discussed the ongoing challenges veterans faced and potential solutions. It was a conversation between 2 people connected by a painful incident who had both grown from it in different ways. The next morning, Daniel stood backstage at the conference preparing for his speech. The auditorium held 300 TSA employees and administrators from across the country. Margaret Bowen was there, now the deputy administrator for the entire agency. Secretary Donnelly had sent a representative to attend. Several news organizations had requested permission to cover the speech. The conference organizer introduced Daniel with a summary of the airport incident and its aftermath. Video clips played on large screens showing the original viral footage and then the Secretary of Defense saluting Daniel. The audience watched in silence. Many of them had seen the videos before, but watching them again in this context gave them new weight. Daniel walked onto the stage carrying his medal case. The cracked hinge was still visible. He set it on the podium and waited for the applause to die down. When the room was quiet, he began. 2 years ago, I had a bad experience at an airport security checkpoint. My military medals were scattered on the floor. I was humiliated and angry. That incident became a viral video and then a national news story. It sparked conversations about how we treat veterans and led to real changes in TSA procedures. But that is not what I want to talk about today. He paused and looked out at the audience. I want to talk about what happened after. About the young TSA agent who made a mistake and how he responded to it. About the opportunities we all have to learn and grow from our failures. About the importance of second chances and the courage it takes to apologize and change. Daniel told the story of Kevin's visit to his house 6 months after the incident. He described the young man's genuine remorse and his commitment to doing better. He talked about Kevin's work at the Veterans Center and the lives he had impacted. He explained how one person's growth from a mistake had helped hundreds of veterans. That young man could have hidden from his mistake. He could have blamed others or made excuses. Instead, he faced it directly. He apologized. He listened and learned. He dedicated himself to serving the very community he had disrespected. That takes courage and character. Kevin sat in the audience listening with tears streaming down his face. He had not known Daniel would talk about him. Several people around him put hands on his shoulders in support. Daniel continued, "We live in a culture that loves to tear people down for their mistakes. Social media makes it easy to judge and condemn from a distance. But that culture of condemnation does not help anyone. It does not heal wounds. It does not prevent future mistakes. It just creates shame and defensiveness." He picked up his medal case and showed the cracked hinge to the audience. "I refuse to fix this damage. It reminds me that important things can be treated carelessly, but it also reminds me that damage does not erase meaning. These medals still represent the same sacrifices and the same people, even with scratches and broken hinges. And the incident that caused this damage led to positive changes that have helped thousands of veterans." Daniel spoke for 40 minutes about service, respect, and redemption. He talked about the importance of understanding what military service means and the challenges veterans face. He praised the Veterans Recognition Initiative and the real improvements it had brought. But he also challenged the audience to see beyond procedures and checklists to the human beings they served every day. Every person who passes through your checkpoints is carrying a story. You cannot know what they have experienced or what they are dealing with, but you can treat them with basic human dignity. You can recognize that items which seem ordinary to you might be deeply meaningful to them. You can choose respect over efficiency when the two conflict. He talked about the young Marine who had helped him that day, about the businessman who had started a foundation, about the Secretary of Defense who had taken time from his schedule to honor a retired soldier, about all the people who had responded to a moment of disrespect with compassion and action. Change happens because people care enough to act. That TSA agent made a mistake, but I also made choices about how to respond. I could have stayed angry. I could have sued or demanded punishment. Instead, I chose to accept an apology and encourage growth. That choice mattered just as much as his mistake. When Daniel finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. People were crying openly. TSA agents who had served in the military saluted. Administrators who had implemented the new training programs felt validated in their efforts, and Kevin Phillips sat in his seat overwhelmed by gratitude and emotion. After the speech, Daniel did something unexpected. He called Kevin up to the stage. Kevin walked up slowly, uncertain what was happening. Daniel shook his hand in front of the entire audience. "This is Kevin Phillips. He was the TSA agent who scattered my medals 2 years ago. He is also the man who had the courage to apologize, to learn, and to dedicate himself to serving veterans. He represents the best of what we can become when we face our mistakes honestly and commit to doing better." The audience applauded. It was not the angry judgment Kevin had faced 2 years ago. It was recognition and support. Several TSA administrators approached him after the speech to learn about his work at the Veterans Center. Others thanked him for his honesty and growth. The story had come full circle from shame to redemption. Margaret Bowen announced that the Veterans Recognition Initiative would be renamed the Daniel Carter Veterans Recognition Initiative. Daniel tried to decline the honor, but Margaret insisted. "Your story started this. Your grace in handling it made change possible. Your name deserves to be attached to the good that came from it." Gregory Shaw attended the conference as a guest speaker discussing his foundation's work. He finally got to meet Daniel in person and recruited him to serve on the foundation's advisory board. Daniel accepted, seeing it as another way to serve veterans even in retirement. That evening, Daniel, Kevin, Margaret, and Gregory had dinner together. 4 people connected by an incident that could have ended in nothing but anger and recrimination. Instead, it had led to meaningful change and unexpected friendships. They talked about the challenges still facing veterans and the work yet to be done. They made plans to collaborate on new initiatives. They celebrated how far they had all come. Peter graduated high school and joined the Marines despite his mother's concerns. Daniel was there at his graduation from boot camp, wearing his old uniform and his medals with their scratches and bent pins. Peter wore his grandfather's dog tags under his uniform. The chain had been shortened to regulation length, but they were the same tags Daniel had worn in Afghanistan.